There we go. Hi. I put two out there. First, in response to what do you do with a project that goes wrong? We were involved with one that fell off the rails last year. And what I would have liked to seen in the publications and in the reports is, well, the truth. Just some facts, sometimes getting into just the business. This is what happened. This is how it happened. Some of those things make it so that I'm not looking at thinking, oh, it's a fluff piece. It's just, it's all positive. Oh, wow, everything's always great. It'd be nice to see sometimes like, oh, this is what went wrong. And most of the time that has to do with business decisions, not so much that the people in here are doing anything wrong artistically or they made a bad choice. So I'd love to see some things like that. And then switching back over to Anthony, what do you see as like the impact? I grew up from Marineland all the way through SeaWorld, through everything. And one of the impacts that I think has happened is that I don't think that most people in the world would even know about killer whales and orcas if it wasn't for SeaWorld and such like that. As that phases out, how do you see that in the world in general as people just plain being aware of these great animals and things like that?
Well, that's the ultimate paradox about it all. And we certainly aren't claiming that, sort of a backhanded, pat on the back by saying this. But back then, killer whales were feared, misunderstood, and, the presentation of the killer whale over the years has changed. It used to be, here they are, they would jump out of the pool, they would be part of a choreography, then it became a show, then it became a production, and then all the way to the point of total understanding, appreciation of the animal, to the point of asking some serious questions about it. And it kind of went full circle to the point that we care so much about it, we understand a lot of the issues, that we found ourselves in this place where we had to back away. And I think the next question for all of us is, why was it just killer whales? What's the next discussion? What's the next animal? And that's the question. So we look at that now and try to understand, well, what's the question behind the question? Are we trying to teach you about animals? Are we trying to teach you about caring about the world? What is it that we're trying to teach you? So that's to answer your question, where do we go next? All I can say is we're trying to lay down layers of paint in the right order, and to us it's becoming a very creatively driven organization. It's partnering with other people that have ideas. It's making sure our ears are clear and that we're having a good perspective on where we're going, and we will solve it. We haven't had enough time to do all the planning, all the work yet, but if it's done once, it can be done again.
I'm curious, is there anything that you can say about how SeaWorld will deal with the media going forward when these kinds of things come up?
Well, right now we hope we're being very open with the media. Because we're a public company, there's only so many things we can say. But we've been very aggressive in just putting out what we consider good facts and information to make sure that the story is told fully. We want to begin to pivot from our past to a future that's bright and positive, and that we're not backing away by the changes we've made, that we're actually going to be more aggressive. Because of a lot of the changes internally, I'll tell you, it feels very much like a startup company more and more as the days go on, because we've made so many changes. But it's a startup company with some good resources. I feel like we're not starting at zero. We're starting, we have good park structure, we have smart people, and it's just really giving them a vision for where we want to go now. So there's a good openness to it.
But when you're up against a critic, because they're not going to forgive the past, in all likelihood.
Sure.
How do you address them?
Well, I think we just have to take the issues at a time. There are different people that we speak to. We have critics that are way over here, very extreme about their opinion. We have a big middle ground of a lot of people who are just listening and observing, trying to make their own decision of which way they want to go. And that's what we were looking at that was going the wrong way. And those are the people we're listening to. we kind of look at it like this. You know, there's some people that are just never going to be happy. It's sort of like Arby's trying to sell to vegetarians. Okay, it's just not going to happen. You know, so there's some part of our market that's just not going to ever be satisfied. But that's not where we're trying to be. We're trying to be in where the broad America is, even globally, and being right there.
I have a question about the Meet Jane, See Jane. You were talking about the data that you didn't have any for theme parks as of yet. And I do know in a previous career of mine, I worked with a client that wrestled with that knew that attendance was, children were half boys, half girls, and yet the entire line was geared towards 8-year-old boys. And when the notion of doing a high-end A-ticket geared towards girls came up, all we had to work with was that 50-50, that's the attendance. And having sat through a number of those meetings where you had terrified general managers that they were going to alienate their brand, we really needed data like what you have for the media. It would be really useful for us in the themed entertainment industry to have something like that we could, as you said, as you gave the example of the books of the venture capitalists, thank you. The venture capitalists, you could plunk those on the table and bam, people said, okay, I think for a number of our opportunities, we need that kind of support. How do we get that from you?
Funding. Truly, we're a nonprofit, so we're only limited by our funds. And actually, I was actually talking to Mario and Cynthia about this today, is we are going to announce a breakthrough in how we do our research. We received a $1.2 million grant from Google to develop a technology platform using audio and video recognition, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, particularly on the engineering side, to extract measurements from moving images. And so right now, the way our research and anybody who's counting in the industry, it's done with a lot of graduate students. And so what this tool allows us to do is with precision point accuracy, not only extract gender, but we can extract speaking and screen time, which is something that nobody in the world can do right now. And there's a lot of other things. So we've come up with another mousetrap. How do we do our research cheaper, deeper, better? But in terms of, if you look at, there's certain things that aren't a moving image. It's a live experience. So the kind of funding that would be needed, unless it's a self-assessment test, and there's someone actually coming into each one of your attractions and actually walking through and doing that kind of analysis, it would require a significant amount of funding.
Yeah, just actually also about the See Jane initiative. I'm just curious, is there like secondary research that you've done or findings that you guys have come upon about how to implement employing more female directors and women, in entertainment? I guess I'm wondering about things like maternity leave and childcare and things that actually deter young women professionals from going the hard driving route or choosing family, for example.
We're really focused on imagery and what's in the content, and because we're a very small nonprofit and we want to fix one problem, which is changing the media message in the entertainment that our youngest children are consuming. So we're really just focusing on writers, producers, and directors behind the camera and the studio executives that are greenlighting. And that's what we're really studying, because the numbers that we have haven't changed since the 40s. It's very glacial. And so once we fix that and we see those numbers jump from 30% to 40, 50%, then we're happy to take something else on, but we want to actually make a huge systemic change in one thing versus trying to be all things to all people, which a lot of nonprofits tend to do that. So we're not ready. So that's why we will partner with organizations, particularly companies that have ambitious CSR, corporate social responsibility initiatives. We work with a lot of companies. We do a lot of consulting. But in terms of our actual research focus, we want to fix this problem first.
Piece of it, there's a lot of focus, clearly for obvious reasons, on female reaction to the images. What about the boys?
Well, gender stereotypes work both ways because not all little boys were meant to be a super athlete. And when you talk about not sexualization, but when you talk about physical body attributes, it works negatively for boys in terms of how boys are depicted in children's media. It's okay to be a geek now, but even 10 years ago it wasn't. So if you weren't that super, strong, tall athlete, you were really left out. And there's an organization that I sit on the board of, it's called Promundo. And they have a documentary out there that they worked on called The Mask You Live In, which was done by Jen Siebel-Newsome, who's a friend of ours. And they're redefining masculinity. And so they're the flip side of what we do. They don't necessarily focus on gender, but what they have found is that and particularly in developing countries, and they're dealing with sub-Saharan Africa and the Arab Spring and a lot of developing countries, they have found that when men embrace caretaking, it's a dramatic reduction in violence against women. Dramatic. So how do we redefine masculinity? What does it mean to be a man? And so they really dive into that, and we partner a lot, and I happen to be on their board. So we're very sensitive to that, but we really want to fix kind of the numbers on the female side. But the stereotypes work both ways, and I don't know if Clay wants to jump in on that one.
As far as stereotypes, they're there, just like I said earlier, with the biases. But the only way biases change is by the public changing their opinion. I mean, I can change my opinion, how I see myself, but I'm only one person.
Thank you. I want a postscript for this. We're coming up to the end of our time. And at the beginning of the session, I talked about cultural immersion and affecting other cultures and working and living in other cultures. And I just have, if David Woolrich, if you would stand up, please. He's from another culture. David has an anecdote that I think is pithy and articulate about the oblique way that we can affect the way things take place in other countries. It's about construction in Dubai, but what he does, what Madeline does in making a change in one place has an osmotic effect on the people around it. And I just want you to share that anecdote. And those of you who've heard it before know what a great treat we're in for, right? So, thank you.
They've usually heard it when I'm half drunk, but so the sober rendition. This goes back to 1993 and the very first project we did in the United Arab Emirates, in the Emirate of Sharjah, which is actually the dry emirate. And we had 6 weeks as part of a design and build team to install all the audio, visual and lighting in a museum. 3 galleries, a geology gallery, a marine gallery and a botany gallery. And I noticed after about 4 days that the on-site electricians were running really slowly. There were about 20 of them, and they kept saying, we've got more men coming tomorrow, as they always do. And our 160 cables, lighting circuits, weren't being housed very quickly. And so I started watching them, and I noticed that the bottleneck was the guy who was cutting the trunking, 4-inch box section trunking. And he had a very blunt hacksaw blade wrapped with a piece of rag. And they obviously couldn't run the cables until the trunking was in place. So I gave him a real hacksaw with a sharp blade in it, and then he initially put it to one side because it was like all his Christmases had come at once, and he didn't want to spoil it, didn't want to break it. And I said, no, use it, start using it now. And he said, yes, but I don't want to break it. I said, look, packet of blades now get sawing. And then I started looking at the other electricians and realized that they had basically a set of tools, which probably when I was about 12 or 13 years old, I had a much better toolkit. And despite the fact that they were working for quite a big electrical contractor, they were just completely under-resourced in terms of tools. They did roughly know what to do with them, but when we gave them proper tools, showed them how to use them, the productivity rate went through the roof compared to where we were. And our relationship got better with them because the set workers there, the guys who are doing the theme working, were mad on cricket. And as a lot of you know, Indians and Pakistanis love cricket too. So by about the 10th day there, every lunchtime was outside the museum playing international cricket between the English team, the Indians and the Pakistanis. But the relationship we got going on the site and the way that we got everybody working together as a team was pretty good.
Just a little bit more to that. I think you might have gotten some pushback from the owner of the site.
Oh, we got a huge pushback because we'd almost actually made the it wasn't the site manager, but it was his boss for the suit that came along, who was from a different caste as well, still Indian, but from a completely different caste. And he was not at all happy with what we'd done because we had more control over his men than he did. I mean, the cruel thing that we did to them was that when we left, they had to go back to working with this guy, and that's where I didn't join all the dots up and think it through to the end game, because they all wanted to come back to England with us. But for the time that we were there, we had them working like troopers. But yeah, we had a huge pushback from the company, and almost how dare we interfere with their team. But the only answer we'd ever get from this guy is, more men come tomorrow, sir, more men come tomorrow.
Didn't you leave the tools with them?
Of course we did. Yes,
Right.
I mean, the tools were theirs,
Right.
and we also made it very clear that the tools were theirs personally, not the company's. That's the point we made to them.
And this is the oblique point I want to make. He didn't go to the boss and say, you're not treating your people well, you need to give them tools. He just gave them the tools. It's like when I run a crew over there, I make sure that they have water and food and fruit, and rather than even bother with the manager of the construction project, I just make sure the workers are taken care of and a little bit better. And it starts to spread. That was just the point I wanted to make. Thank you, David. Thank you very much. Any final questions, comments? I want to thank our team. You guys did a great job. I really appreciate all of your participation.